The scene begins with David moving into his new house after his recent divorce. His daughter Jessica helps him move in and is concerned about his condition since the turn of events with the divorce. They wander around the spacious house and find some things left behind by the previous owner. They also find a small closet leading to a locked door with a $100 bill on the floor. They then use the money to buy Chinese food for dinner. While having dinner, David expresses his appreciation for Jessica's support. Jessica also shares that she's currently dating someone and she wants David to meet him. David adds in the excitement of the news that he's potentially up for promotion. As they end dinner, they agree to meet again within a week to meet her boyfriend. The next day, David wakes up from an early visit from his landscape. The guy checks the property and lists down things that David wants to be done in the property. David then tells him that he'll be installing the septic tank himself, and that once it's done, they can continue with the landscape. Later that day, David begins to work on the septic tank at his backyard. Immediately after, his shovel hits a shallow and somewhat huge box buried underneath. When David lifts up the lid, he's shocked to find a corpse of an old man and a stack of money inside. David then takes a bundle of money and immediately covers the box again. He returns to the house to check if the money is authentic and is surprised to learn that it definitely is. David hides the bundle in the cabinet of his bathroom and tries to act normal. Later that night, David awakes from the sound of faint footsteps. But when David checks it out, he finds nothing and is completely alone. The next day, David goes to work at a programming company that develops video games. His boss, Mr. Wu, expresses his favor for his possible promotion as project manager and even shows him the office. Later that day, David spends time cleaning his backyard, but is frequently distracted by the thought of the money inside the box. David finally gives in to the temptation and digs up the box again, but this time with the intention to take all the money. David brings the money to the house and counts each one of them. It totals to an amount of $3 million. David then hides the money inside the closet. After this, David talks to himself in the bathroom mirror and argues whether or not to report the discovery of the corpse. That night, David hears strange noises again. He heads downstairs with his baseball bat to check for an intruder. Once David is assured that he's safe, he checks the money in the closet and finds it untouched. But when he turns off the lights, he sees the corpse standing outside the window. David freaks out and rushes outside to catch it. At his yard, David finds no one and instead notices the box unburied. David lifts the lid to see the corpse and confirms if it's really dead. The next morning, David wakes up and finds himself covered in dirt. Due to a lack of sleep and paranoia of seeing the corpse, David appears physically stressed throughout the day. In addition to this, his boss puts more pressure on him after the promotion. David then meets up with his friend Mark in a local bar and vents out his frustration with everything going on in his life lately. Upon arriving home, David sees mysterious muddy shoe prints on the floor. He panics and rushes to the closet to check the money, which remains safe. That night, David cleans up the shoe prints and puts his suit away, but he gets spooked out the moment he turns off the lights. David's paranoia seems to get worse as he keeps hearing strange noises and seeing the corpse. David then checks the money again and decides to seal it inside the box, attempting to secure it from any possible robbers. The following day, David tries to open the locked door in the closet using a drill, but fails. David then goes to the yard to dig the box again, thinking that the key might be with the corpse. After successfully removing the nails, David looks for any valuables on the corpse and finds a wallet along with some keys. Later that night, David opens the fridge but finds nothing to eat. Suddenly, David sees the corpse greeting him in the hallway and it attacks him. It turns out to be only a dream, but he wakes up again when the corpse grabs his feet. The next day, David calls in sick to work and takes a bundle of cash to purchase equipment to install a security system in his house. David is clearly determined to catch whoever is making strange noises each night. After installing the security system, he uses the keys from the corpse in hopes of possibly opening the locked door. Upon successfully unlocking it, David enters it, which leads him to the basement. But soon after, David makes a disturbing discovery of numerous corpses wrapped in plastic lying around the floor. David is extremely shocked and runs. He then contemplates whether to finally report it to the authorities, but he seems hesitant because of the money. That night, The security siren alarms, notifying David of the strange movements in the area. David immediately turns on the lights outside and checks the surveillance monitors to find the corpse. However, the power goes out because of the storm. David feels very frustrated with the situation, but luckily, the power returns shortly thereafter. Upon seeing the surveillance again, David is shocked to see the corpse standing outside his room. David becomes anxious as the corpse attempts to get inside. The corpse then stares at the camera, as if he knows David is watching him, and quickly heads out the house. David takes his bat and follows the corpse outside, but accidentally steps on a broken mug at his doorstep. But what happens doesn't stop David from catching the corpse. The man drags his injured foot as the rain pours down hard. David is extremely frustrated to find the yard empty again. When David opens the box, he curses at the corpse and angrily orders it to open its eyes, but it doesn't respond. The next day, David wakes up inside the box while hugging the corpse. Terrified, he gets out and cleans himself as he sees messages from work. As David drives away, he sees the corpse in broad daylight, standing at a distance staring at him. For David, this only proves that the corpse is indeed alive, and that he's not crazy. David immediately limps towards the corpse, but it quickly walks back to the box. Because of David's injury from last night, he can't catch up to it. Thus, the corpse teases David as it descends back to the box. When David reaches the corpse, it appears dead again and remains unresponsive. David has had enough with the corpse's mind games and ultimately decides to use a chainsaw to destroy it. After the incident, David goes to work looking like a dead man who awfully reeks. Mr. Wu shows up and they have a heated argument about the game update. David inevitably disrespects his boss, which causes him to be fired and kicked out of the building. On David's way home, he throws out his uniform and drives in anger. David's unstable condition causes him to be insane as he celebrates being unemployed. When David reaches his driveway, he tries to stop the landscaper from going near the box. The landscaper refuses to listen to David and calls the police. David immediately grabs the hammer and kills the landscaper before he can report it. After realizing what he's done, David hides the corpse in the basement besides the unknown bodies. David also dumps the corpse in the basement to hide it. After that, he's cleaning himself. He starts talking to his reflection in the mirror again, who somehow convinces him that the landscaper wanted to steal his money. That night, David wakes up from the alarm and sees the corpse in the surveillance standing at the kitchen. David heads downstairs with his bat and unknowingly attacks Mark, who just wanted to check on him. David is clearly hallucinating and out of madness kills Mark, thinking he was out for his money. Mark's body is then carried to the basement. The next morning, David takes the bag of money back inside the house and spends the entire day treating it as a person. The following day, Jessica's boyfriend visits David and introduces himself, but David suddenly knocks him out. David also takes him to the basement with the illusion that he was also there for the money. Soon after, Jessica visits David and immediately notices his distressing appearance. Jessica then looks for her boyfriend, and David suspiciously escorts her down to the basement where he is. Once they're in the basement, David knocks her out too and ties her up with chains. David is clearly obsessed with whether everyone will take his money. Jessica denies the allegations and pleads to let her go. She then tries to snap David out of his crazy world, which seems to slightly work on him. David then assures her that he will fix everything and leaves her in the basement with her dying boyfriend. He dresses up in a tuxedo and carries the box of money back into the box. He pours gas over it and attempts to put fire to it, but he can't bring himself to do it. Out of nowhere, the rain starts pouring as David resorts to the last reasonable thing he can think of. Because of David's greed, he decides to follow the bunch of money before it completely consumes him.